You're listening to Dateline Latin America, Tear Gas and Tango with
Joe Goldman, 37 years with ABC News, then with UPI, with The Village Voice, and many other.
And me, Daniel Schweimler, originally from London, formerly of the BBC, 19 years, and more recently with Al Jazeera English across Latin America.
They'll be sitting at a kitchen table in Buenos Aires talking about their journalistic adventures across the region, covering earthquakes, flooding and fires, talking to presidents, charlatans, sports stars and other newsmakers. In short, journalism and the state of the world.
Hey, here we are, Daniel, in the Goldman residence here, hoping that Platense doesn't have their new light posts fall in the house.
Because we are in the shadow of the Platense football ground, aren't we? The stadium.
Yes, we are.
Yeah, who are now in the Copa Libertadores, hence the new light. It's kind of towering above us, isn't it? But you can't fight the Argentine Football Association and their lovely president, Chiqui Tapia, one of the most powerful men in Argentina.
Well, technically, the head of the AFA sometimes is more powerful than the president, right?
Well, the previous guy, Grondona, was incredibly powerful and managed to outlive the dictatorship and several presidents. Yeah, these are powerful people. We seek refuge in football simply because there's so much misery going on in the rest of the world, but we will address the issues in the rest of the world. Yeah.
And how they affect Latin America.
Yeah, because it's all part of the same story in a way, isn't it? It's about the superpowers, the United States, China, Russia, trying to assert their influence in what they see as their sphere of influence. And we've got it in Latin America. We've had it since 1823, and the Monroe Doctrine, named after the then president, basically telling the European colonial powers, Britain, France, Spain and Portugal, to piss off. This is our neck of the woods. This is our backyard. And one way or the other, since 1823 onwards, the US has, to differing degrees, asserted that dominance in the way that they're, over resources mostly, natural resources, in the way they've recently done in Venezuela, getting rid of Maduro for the oil, and one could argue what they're doing now in Iran.
It's been a harrowing few weeks or months, whatever, and it just seems that there's no planning going on. It just seems to be almost like a game of Risk. Do you have Risk in London?
Yeah,
in England?
exists, yeah.
Here it's called Teg.
Okay, yeah, I've seen that.
The similar game. And it just seems like Pete Hegseth is playing a game of Risk, and there's no thought behind anything going on.
Unless they're deliberately trying to create chaos, which they're doing very successfully, and out of that chaos, the strongest will prevail, so maybe that's the thinking. Who knows? Who knows what the thinking is? I've given up listening to analysts, the so-called experts, because how can anybody apply rational thinking to the actions and words of totally irrational people?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's one analyst who I do have some respect for, Mearsheimer, who was saying that the winner in all this is China, which is just laying low and putting its head down as the bullets fly over. Yeah, I don't know if you saw the latest news, which is that Trump has lifted the embargo against Russian oil. So Russia's going to have a windfall profit out of the war in the Middle East at the same time that they're fighting their war in Ukraine.
And if countries are outside of international law or invading other countries, what's to stop China taking control of Taiwan, as it often says it has every right to do? Who's there to tell Putin he should get the hell out of Ukraine because it's wrong under international law, if Trump, with the backing of the Israelis, is doing exactly the same, as he's already done in Venezuela, as he will no doubt do in Cuba. He's already said we're going to do a friendly occupation of Cuba. At the moment, Cuba just let it rot. It's almost like a state of siege, isn't it? It's let nothing in. Try and stop people getting out as well. Let them wallow in their own misery until the time comes that it's so bad, when the US has finished, run out of fuel in Iran, it would just walk into Cuba with supplies, with food, with fuel, with toilet paper, with the things that Cubans are desperate for, and to say, look, we've come to save you, even though they've created the problem themselves in the first place.
There was news that the Cuban leadership said that they admitted that they are in talks with the Trump administration.
Right.
So,
including the president, Diaz-Canel, has said,
yes.
And Raul Castro's grandson has also been talking behind the scenes. So, I mean, they'll do a Delcy Rodriguez, I guess, will they? If they want to stay in power, either you end up like Nicolas Maduro in a jail cell in New York, or go into exile, I guess, taking bags of cash with you, or you do a deal with the invading power. So at least you keep some degree of autonomy and some degree of stability, with the US pulling the strings, openly or not so openly, who knows?
The sad thing about the whole situation in Venezuela is that almost no political prisoners have been released.
Right.
That is, to me, the showpiece of what kind of a stupid invasion it was. That should have been the first priority.
Yeah. Also, what you don't see, I mean, there are tens of thousands of, as we know, Venezuelans. 6-7 million Venezuelans have left the country in recent years. Tens of thousands of them live here in Buenos Aires. What we're not seeing, after the fall of Nicolas Maduro, which is exactly what these people wanted, you're not seeing people boarding up their shops, and going back to Venezuela.
Yeah.
Almost nobody, as far as I know. Why would you? As you say, political prisoners not being released. You risk being thrown in prison yourself as a so-called dissident, anti the regime. So the regime is gone, yet the regime is still very much in place. So nothing will change as far as those 6-7 million Venezuelans are concerned. And they're obviously watching very closely, but not going anywhere just yet.
The situation is so crazy right now that we have a situation over oil going on both in Venezuela and in the Middle East, in Iran. How much oil do those two countries represent of the total amount?
Venezuela and Iran, I read the other day, 31% of the world's
31%.
oil reserves. Yeah. And the US now has access one way or the other to, or will do in Iran, they hope. Certainly he's got access in Venezuela, and Donald Trump has been quite open about his need, his greed for the Venezuelan oil. But that's always, one way or the other, the superpowers, as they then were, Russia, or Soviet Union as it then was, and the United States, were bidding for influence, for power in Latin America. The Cold War period, we used to have, what was it called, the School of the Americas, wasn't it, in Panama, where, the leaders of Latin American dictatorships, right-wing governments, military, police, were being trained by US troops to be dictators, basically, to repress opposition, most notably communist opposition, in the interests of, American interests, I guess, anti-communist interests. And that was prevalent throughout, 50s, 60s, certainly into the 70s and 80s, until the collapse of the Soviet Union.
The interesting thing to me also is that Donald Trump has made it a point of his government, the idea of oil production, to go to oil, to take all kinds of money out of solar, wind energy, any kind of alternative energy. So now, suddenly, oil prices have zoomed because of the war that he's created, and there are no alternatives. No alternatives.
And countries in Latin America, Argentina was trying to develop, it's very windy down in the south in Patagonia, trying to develop their wind energy industry, as have other countries, but that's kind of taken a back seat now. So it's all about those resources. And again, you could argue that when Javier Milei won the midterm elections with the US backing, with a threat that money would be withheld if Milei didn't win, there's a price to be paid for that. And we have US interests moving into Latin America, getting access to, because environmental laws are just disappearing. So if mining companies want to come in, and they're very often US mining companies, oil companies, military base is being talked about in Ushuaia. US military was working with the Ecuadorian authorities against their narco traffickers very recently. So all of that independence that Latin American nations used to fight for, you could argue they were never truly independent, but even less so now. You do what you're told. The Shield of the Americas conference, all the right-wing presidents of Latin America, which is
And
now
there's a lot of them.
It's
Yeah.
most of them, yeah. The only exclusions were Claudia Sheinbaum in Mexico, Colombia didn't take part, and Lula in Brazil.
Yeah.
The only three major Latin American countries that didn't take part in that conference.
Delcy Rodriguez didn't go.
Didn't go, but she's already in his pocket. He didn't need to go. So we're in that situation, aren't we? And we've just had the lovely son of a former German Nazi cast taking office a couple of days ago in Chile, who said he's very much in the United States pockets. He'll do whatever they ask him to do. There's the largest Palestinian community outside the Middle East is in Chile.
Yep.
But he has said, we are aligning ourselves with Israel. We are backing Israel every step of the way. I mean, the interesting element in all of this in Latin America is China, as it has been in recent years. They're not sending troops in. But they are working behind the scenes. I mean, most of the soya production in Brazil, Paraguay, Argentina, I mean, most Argentines don't eat soya burgers, they eat meat burgers. That soy goes to China to feed Chinese cattle. It's a huge industry. It's kept the Argentine economy afloat. Brazil makes a fortune. So you had presidents in Brazil, the previous one, Bolsonaro, who was racist towards the Chinese, as has Javier Milei, saying he hates communist China. Yet business continues to be done with China because
one can say, I actually covered this a lot in Brazil. The Chinese put tremendous amount of money into the port of Santos, for example, where they rebuilt the port, made it one of the most modern ports in Latin America. And part of it was they had 1/5 or 1/4 of the port was theirs to bring out all the soy products from southern Brazil. So it was a very successful you scratch my back, I scratch your back deal.
Yeah.
They did the same thing with aluminum production in San Luis, in the northeast part of Brazil, where they built an aluminum plant. Part of that aluminum went back into the Brazilian economy. What the U.S. has not done, I'm constantly at odds with people in the embassy here and people in various embassies throughout Latin America, is the U.S. has just not been involved in that kind of trying to stimulate business in Latin America. And really, those businesses are businesses that make money for, be it the Chinese mining companies, the Chinese port facility building companies. They make money, and yet it's creating something that China really needs, modern port facilities.
Yeah.
There's also the new Peruvian facility about 100 miles north of Lima that people tell me is about as modern as it gets in the world.
Well, Rosario, the main port in Argentina, the railway leading to Port of Rosario, the investment in the port itself has come from the Chinese. You don't see Chinese companies, they're there, they're definitely there, operating across Latin America. During the pandemic, when we had Americans trying to sell their vaccines, the Russians with the Sputnik vaccine, which I've got some of them in my veins still, and the Chinese, all three superpowers were trying to win favour with the people of Latin America by bringing in those vaccines. The Chinese stayed behind afterwards, built factories or built laboratories in Chile, in Peru, to try to develop more drugs. The US and China just came in, the US to make money, and I think the Russians to try and win influence and thanks for their work. So they're different approaches always.
I can't think of a Russian-built factory in South America.
No.
Can you?
No, I think during this Cold War, their attitude was very similar to the US, tried to win over governments, support certain governments.
That's right, yeah.
And when we had the famous invasion of Grenada in, what year was it, in the 80s?
83, maybe?
Was it? Yeah, when the then government was seen to be too pro-Soviet, and the Americans simply invaded small island in the Caribbean. And obviously Cuba, that thorn in the side of the United States for all those years.
But Russia has been specifically not involved in development.
No.
I'm trying to think if there's anything I'm missing.
The US companies here. We've got McDonald's, we've got Starbucks in Buenos Aires, so there's US culture here. if you can call it that. It's here in a big way. But yeah, US investment, I mean, individual companies certainly, but governments funded, I think probably not. So what do the Argentine people prefer? They like US culture, they like their McDonald's and their Starbucks, but when it comes down to it, the fundamentals, the Chinese are possibly the best bet because they've invested in the things that are going to last, like your trade, your trade infrastructure.
The other day I was by the obelisk, which is in the center of Buenos Aires, and I looked to my right, and there's a big showroom for Chinese electric vehicles.
Okay.
Right in 9 de Julio, the most important area of the center of Buenos Aires, and there is a Chinese electric car showroom. The U.S. just doesn't seem to want to invest in Latin America at this point.
Yet it wants Latin America on its side. Hence, as we were talking about the School of the Americas and the dictatorships, we know now, because documents have been published, about CIA involvement in the overthrow of Allende in Chile, and Pinochet coming to power. We know about that. We know about US support of the Argentine dictatorship. The Ford car company has factories here working with or against the trade unions, any kind of dissidents. The management were helping Ford to keep their profits high by shipping the so-called dissidents.
I mean, even the companies that have, the either car companies or oil companies from the U.S., they've been here long term. They've been here 60, 70 years. Ford, GM, they've been here for decades. Oil companies, they've been here for decades. It's one thing to have McDonald's here. It's another thing to bring in investment, real investment in products. And that just has not been happening. We mentioned Ecuador a little bit, a country both you and I love and have been there quite a bit. The U.S. had its Air Force base, Manta. About 15 years ago, they closed the base. It's recently been reopened, and the U.S. is using that as a trampoline to getting involved in trying to root out the narcotic trafficking in Ecuador, which has become a tremendous, tremendous problem in a country that, as you and I would remember, never had that problem. And now it's become, under terrible leadership in the last 10 years, it's become a crime haven, whereas before, even the drug lords of Colombia and Peru, managing their cocaine, would never use Ecuador. The U.S. is now going in and trying to fix a crime problem that in many ways they help support by supporting the last few presidencies, including the one now of our banana maven.
In a way, it's in their interest to have the cartels organising things in the way they do. I mean, the US was involved in Colombia for so many years, working supposedly, the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Agency, working with the Colombian authorities, in theory, against the drug bosses. And sometimes they did, and sometimes they didn't. But as you say, it's a situation they created. Yeah, it's a way of keeping their hand in, of staying involved, controlling to some degree Latin American politics. The last thing you need is stability. Independent countries doing what they want to do. We saw what happened when Brazil tried to stand up, or fighting against, the internet companies, involvement. As soon as Lula spoke out about it, they come down like a ton of bricks.
Although Brazil did kind of win that fight.
He kind of won that one for now. You wonder for how long. I mean, I saw it, going back to Uruguay, first country in the world to legalize the production, sale, consumption of marijuana. But as soon as they did it, it was setting a bad example as far as the US were concerned. So the only way the US could get, to kind of put obstacles in the way was to make sure that, most of the world uses MasterCard or Visa. So it became illegal in international terms, as far as they were concerned, to use these credit cards to buy drugs. So the only way the Uruguayans could get around it was cash only. Because you couldn't buy, although it was legal.
I didn't know that.
Although it was legal, they could not use the US-backed credit cards, which Visa and MasterCard are, in Uruguay. And the Uruguayans sent a delegation up to Washington to discuss this, but it's legal here now, There's no illegal things are not being bought, but they're illegal in the rest of the world. But by having Uruguay legalize marijuana, and it works as a policy most of the time, that it would set a bad example. To the rest of the world, and the whole world, although some states in the US are legalizing,
30 states.
So, but it was Uruguay.
And let me tell you, you can go and buy marijuana in 30 states legally using your credit card.
Yeah. So there's contradictions and hypocrisy every step of the way there.
The US has never amended its federal laws against marijuana. Even though states have the option, the federal laws remain against marijuana, and Mr. Trump is not going to change that anytime soon.
Right. I mean, Latin America has an interesting relationship with the US, don't they, in many ways? I mean, there are people, especially of the left, who are vehemently anti-US culture, US politics, yet Argentines go in huge numbers to buy in Miami. There's a big Argentine community there. So there was that famous, probably not true, but piece of graffiti on the walls in Argentina saying something like, "Yankees go home," and in brackets underneath, "but take me with you." Which kind of maybe sums up the relationship, because Argentina was meant to be the country was the most anti-US in Latin America at one stage. I don't know if that's still the case, but because of those politics, Cold War politics, and
Javier Milei has said that he supports the war in Iran. Now, we've had two major bombings here. I'm not saying that he shouldn't support the war, but to openly say that puts a target on your country.
Which it was in 1994, wasn't it? Argentina became a
92 and
part of it.
94,
Probably Iran, probably Hezbollah involvement. It's never
Possibly,
been proven.
yeah.
It's never been proven, but the bombing of the Amia Jewish Cultural Center. It was.
I mean, if you ask somebody from this government, it was Iran who was behind the two bombings.
And there were international arrest warrants out there for then members of the Iranian government,
correct,
which I think are still valid, still out there. As far
If
as
they
I
haven't
know,
been killed by US or Israeli bombs. If it's true that Iran was behind those two bombings, which killed, I don't know, about 130 people, why would you want to goad them into making a third attempt?
But it's what you're expected to say. If you've sided with Donald Trump, as Javier Milei has, as Casting Chile says he's going to do, then that's what you're expected to say. Anyone who's not openly supporting him is seen as an enemy. And he was criticising Keir Starmer in the UK recently for not having given 100% support. He's no Winston Churchill. Nobody is ever claiming he was, but that was his insult towards Starmer.
That was probably the best thing said about Starmer yet.
Probably,
for Starmer's own popularity. Of course, the U.S. has also gone against Spain for Spain refusing to allow any kind of use of airports or airspace.
And strong words from Pedro Sanchez in Spain as well, against what has to be said. It's an illegal war, shouldn't be, without UN backings. I mean, Latin America, nobody's out of this in a way, are they? Although it's happening, the bombs are exploding on the other side of the world. Everybody's watching, you don't know who's going to be next. Will it be Greenland? Will it be Cuba? Venezuela's already happened. Who knows?
I think what we're seeing is, talking about Cast in Chile compared to Piñera.
Piñera, Sebastián Piñera,
who was a right-wing president. Piñera never said things to try to, intimidate the Palestinian community. He had a good relationship with the Palestinian community. As you said, it's one of the biggest or the biggest Palestinian community outside of the Middle East. That was a way of functioning. We're seeing a different kind of right-wing leadership where, to do things to befriend, and I put that in parentheses, to befriend the United States, you go to whatever extreme.
Whatever Trump wants you to say, you say.
You say it. And even if that causes internal conflicts. We just had a incident in a synagogue in Michigan where I think one person was killed, a couple of people injured, and it turns out that the terrorist who rammed his car into the synagogue with explosives that, thank goodness, didn't go off, was a family member of people who had been killed in Lebanon in the bombing. So the repercussions of all what the U.S. and Israel is doing is being felt throughout the world. One way to try to balance that is to not say what Javier Milei is saying, to not go to extremes like caste in Chile, to try to do things in such a manner that your country is not a target.
Yeah, I mean, what we do, we risk going back to this kind of polarized state we had in the 70s and 80s with, right-wing dictatorships in Brazil, Paraguay, Uruguay, Argentina, Chile, all working together under the Plan Condor to kind of silence critics. And there was that thing, in the aftermath of those dictatorships, they all came tumbling down one way or the other. It's never again, nunca más, and we still got these human rights groups fighting for some kind of answers, for some kind of justice, which we'll talk about next time, yeah? So 24th of March is the...
50 years?
50 years. 24th of March is the day that Argentina commemorates or remembers the dictatorship and the 30,000 or so victims, plus the others who were imprisoned, tortured, went into exile, the misery that was caused. But interestingly, Argentina, tens of thousands still march, people who weren't even born during the dictatorship are out there with that slogan, nunca más, never again.
Yes.
And this is why I think this fear that we're heading back. We have apologists for the dictatorship in government in Chile now, in government in Argentina, pro-Pinochet, pro the military. So we risk going back there in many ways. So we'll talk about that and the resistance to it.
I think we'll have a very interesting day on March 24th when the 50th anniversary comes around. I think there'll be a tremendous amount of people coming out to march because of what's going on here, because of the laws that have been passed recently, and because of a government that's trying to make people forget what happened here in a country which laudably, really, human rights-wise, Argentina is top rung.
In many ways.
Yeah.
We'll talk about that next week. In the meantime, Joe, stay safe. Nunca más.
You too.
Venceremos.
Bye-bye.
Bye.